We've had formats that felt kind of pretty solved, like within a month or so, and this one's it continues to be interesting. I don't think we'll see too many deck developments happening over the next few months, at least until Magic 2014 comes out in the very near future.
Right. Yeah, we've got that coming out. What is mid to late July? What is it? I want to say it's like around July 20th.
I think it's like that's the official release, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. So when it would be actually legal.
Yep.
So we'll see what happens then. But for now, we're underway. Both players with just land go so far, and is that a blind obedience from Dan Riebling playing blue-white-red Geist? This is a blue-white-red pseudo mirror, I'll say. I mean, we're gonna have a lot of overlap, I think, but I think Daniel looks like he's got kind of a more aggressive bent with Geist of St. Traft, Boros Reckoner, and 4 copies of Thundermaw Hellkite.
Yeah, in general, the player with Geist of St. Traft in Game 1 is going to be pretty heavily favored. You saw this in the top 8 of Pro Tour Gatecrash. Jerry Thompson taking a loss to Joel Larson. Mm-hmm. Joel Larson obviously playing, a Geist-oriented version of Blue-White-Red, while Jerry had chosen to eschew them.
So as you see, after the Geist resolved, Drew chose that point to play a Snapcaster Mage, which is going to come into play tapped, so that he could untap it on his turn and have it available as a blocker for that Geist of St. Traft, because that is one of the ways he can answer Geist of St. Traft. And he's going to have an opportunity to do that now. So there you go. You see Snapcaster jumps in front of Geist of St. Traft, Angel swinging in, and we're going to see a turn burn.
It's
just the turn half of turn burn.
I believe it's actually the burn half.
Oh, okay. He could be doing that.
But peculiar.
I saw all 3 lands. I'm thinking he tapped all 3.
But he extorted,
he had one. Yeah. So
Drew dissipates. That was a strange decision to attack first from Daniel. I think, like, he's not playing around Restoration Angel at that point, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't play around an extra Snapcaster Mage. I'm not really sure why he would attack first rather than just go ahead and try and zap the guy and see what happens.
Either way, it was dissipated and the board is cleared. Drew did take 4 from the Angel, and Daniel's follow-up is a Geist of St. Traft.
Number 2.
Yet again, yeah. So Drew does the same trick, except this time with a Restoration Angel, plays that at the end of turn, comes into play tapped. He immediately untaps it during his turn and now has it available to block.
And note that Drew has a Renounce the Guilds in his hand. He's actually, I'm not sure if he had it when he made the Snapcaster Mage play, but he certainly, had the options available to go for that instead. But instead, he's choosing to kind of try and get a little aggression going. I think, see his 1 Thundermaw Hellkite in his grip.
So you see the Restoration Angel actually attacks there, and then the Renounce the Guilds, as you mentioned, takes out that Geist of St. Traft. So right now we've got Drew Levin with a Restoration Angel and Dan Riebling with a Blind Obedience in play.
Yeah, the rest of Drew's hand looks to be another Angel, a Thundermaw Hellkite, and a War Leader's Helix, I believe.
Dan Riebling with yet another Geist of the St. Traft variety. That resolves, and Drew would like to find another Snapcaster or another Renounce the Guilds. I believe he's only got 1 main deck Renounce, so
I don't know how concerned he is with it, to be honest. He might just be ahead in this race. Obviously, Thundermaw Hellkite is not the dragon he once was with a Blind Obedience in play, but that's still a pretty healthy dragon.
Yeah, so you see Thundermaw comes in tapped. Angel gets in for another 3, and Daniel is able to attack with his Geist of St. Traft and Angel unblocked to knock Drew to 8.
Yeah, Drew is, definitely concerned about dying on the next turn. He'll probably be playing War Leader's Helix this turn rather than another dragon.
Yeah, I imagine he does something like Helix on the Angel or Helix on Daniel. So looks like a turn burn.
This looks like just a turn.
Yeah, well, it's the turn burn. He's doing one or the other. It looks like a turn, and he's going to extort. Yeah, I imagine it's just turn here.
That fogs the 5 damage. Drew's only getting in for 3. And while Daniel's tapped out, I would be sorely tempted to fire that War Leader's Helix at his face. Almost, uncontrollably tempted even.
Daniel with 3 copies of War Leader's Helix of his own. Only 2 in Drew's deck.
The issue is, if you fire that War Leader's Helix, you go to 11, you're still dead in 2 swings from Geist of St. Traft, and your opponent's not dead to your attack next turn. If he has any spell, like basically anything that does anything. So Drew is instead hoping to bait his opponent. He's going to just pass, Daniel attacks. He hopes Daniel goes for the kill. The problem is if Daniel's savvy, he won't go for the kill, and that'll mean Drew wasted this turn. He didn't get to use his mana for anything useful.
So you see the Geist of St. Traft swinging in, and Drew is going to apparently take it all.
Daniel goes for it. Wow. Drew gets him. Drew is going to War Leader's Helix.
Yeah, I'm going to Helix you, go up to 5. And
This will put him to 11, and he'll take 4 from the Extort and the Searing Spear. And that'll leave him back at 7, basically, just negating... or sorry, he's at 1. He does go to 5. We haven't updated. So he basically just stays at 1. And, you know, he's dead to a 0 mana cost spell, but instead, he gets Daniel.
Yeah, with a Pillar of Flame for that last bit of damage after the Restoration Angel and Thundermaw Hellkite deal 8. So Drew Levin takes game 1 fairly quickly, and that was pretty exciting because it looked scary for both players at different points. And Daniel Riebling able to just keep replacing his Geist of St. Trafts. Yep. It's a difficult card to deal with as it is. Drew able to kind of just buy time dealing with the first 2 and then racing the last one.
Yeah, Daniel got a little overeager in that game. Notice if he had just attacked with the Geist and just passed turn, not done anything, you know, what's Drew going to do? Drew's going to attack him for 8, knocking Daniel down to 2, and then, you know, he's at an interesting spot. Obviously, Daniel drew Pillar of Flame, but if he hadn't, how does he play from that position? He can try and cast the War Leader's Helix, but Daniel will kill him with any spell in response via Extort.
Yeah.
So Drew obviously can't do that. He just has to pass back, and then Daniel has free and clear range to just attack with his Geist of St. Traft. If Drew tries to War Leader's Helix, he casts a spell in response. So by initiating the exchange of spells in the casting of Searing Spear, Daniel actually, you know, set Drew up to have a much more favorable situation, whereas if he had held the Searing Spear and just waited for Drew to do something, Drew would have been forced to draw a relevant spell. As it turned out, Drew did draw one. So, yeah, looks like things, unless Daniel had a completely different set of spells in his hand, looks like things would have ended up about the same way, but still a good learning moment.
Right, it's one of those situations where, you know, it all comes down to really that War Leader's Helix, and you'd rather be responding to it than it be cast in response to your kill spell. And that's basically what happened there for Drew. And we're going to game 2. So looking at the boards, we've seen Drew's sideboard quite a bit already, but he does have 2 additional copies of Renounce the Guilds, which are going to be huge here if he expects to be facing down multiple copies of Geist of St. Traft, as he was in that particular game. If Daniel keeps in the Boros Reckoners that he's got, which I assume he will, those will also be able to be dealt with by the Renounce the Guilds. I'm actually curious about Daniel's sideboard because we haven't seen him on camera yet today.
He's got quite a sideboard. A lot of 1-ofs, a couple of 2-ofs. As far as the more interesting cards, I honestly, you know, I could maybe see bringing in like 1 Purify the Grave. It fights your opponent's Snapcaster Mages with a reasonable amount of value. It's not the best, but it's not the worst. And the Singleton Dispel is 100% coming in alongside the Negate and perhaps the Counterflux. Those are all options. Having seen the Thundermaw Hellkite from Drew, he might be inclined to keep those Blind Obediences in. I don't know how good they actually are, though. That's Drew's only Thundermaw Hellkite in the main deck. Yeah. I don't know if he'll sideboard in more or not. I honestly couldn't tell you. It's possible. Maybe he sideboards out the other one. He saw Blind Obedience, so, you know, that could be in and of itself a whole guessing game. Like,
yeah, Thundermaw, like you said, not quite the dragon that you want him to be when he comes into play tapped. A lot of his value, in fact, probably the majority of his value tends to be in that haste. And, you know, so a lot of times it's great to be able to deal with Lingering Souls or, you know, tapping down a bunch of flyers and everything. But, you know, that haste is a big part of his draw. And Blind Obedience really neuters that. I think it was interesting just a play that Drew brought up that he was able to do early in the tournament where his opponent was attacking with, I want to say it was 2 Thundermaw Hellkites, or he wasn't attacking with them. He had just played them, and Drew pre-combat, I think, flashed in a Restoration Angel, blinked his own Thundermaw Hellkite to tap
him
his
down.
opponents,
that is nice.
And then won the game on the swing back. So there are some neat tricks with Restoration Angel Thundermaw Hellkite that we haven't seen in a while. Really.
Proving that 2 dragons are not necessarily better than 1.
Yeah. Especially when they're, you know, Thundermaw Hellkite trumps Thundermaw Hellkite. The second one trumps the first one, or at least can. So we'll see what they decide to do. Between them, they've got 7 Thunderball Hellkites and 6 Restoration Angels. So we may see all kinds of shenanigans. But yeah, I don't know if I like the Blind Obedience otherwise.
The issue is that this matchup really revolves around the fact that Daniel has Geist and Drew does not. So Drew is naturally going to be forced to defend himself and take advantage of any opening he gets. Like, he needs to be really aggressive when he gets the moment, but has to just assume Daniel is going to be the one pushing tempo.
Yeah.
And Daniel should be taking that into account. You know, he shouldn't want to be playing the card advantage control-y route. Like, he should be wanting to just get Drew dead as quickly as possible and draw on the fact that Geist of St. Traft is just a huge weapon in the matchup.
Yeah.
He saw that Renounce the Guilds, and yeah, you know, that has to be scary or whatever, but at the same time, just one hit with a Geist of St. Traft is already basically like 2-ish cards.
Right.
So
you get a lot of value just out of that one hit.
If you can get in one hit, then a Renounce the Guilds is not actually that good a trade.
And we're underway. I believe Drew went to 6 there. Did he?
I
think he did. Yeah.
Yep.
He did go to 6.
Confirmed.
All right, and there we see the Blind Obedience. So Dan decided he wanted to keep that. And we've got an Augur of Bolus, comes into play tapped. Drew looking, finds Syncopate, Restoration Angel land, go to the bottom.
Not an ideal find for Drew. Syncopate's one of those counters you really don't want to reveal to your opponent you have.
Yeah.
Daniel's going to take 2. You know what that means.
I think it's Geist time.
I assume. Yep, Geist of St. Traft on turn 3, on the play, with a Blind Obedience already out there. Drew, under pressure. Has a lot of blue-red lands. Don't see a white land out there yet.
Yeah, that's this is his second game we've seen Drew today where he is having trouble finding white mana. The plains do not like to show up here in Philadelphia. That is Slayer's Stronghold, I believe, from Dan.
Yep, +2/+0 haste. And Drew's going to go ahead and block the Geist. Dan has the option of pumping it to kill the Augur of Bolus. Declines.
So Drew takes 4 from the Angel there.
Daniel just sitting back and chilling. Drew's going to try and dig for lands. Think Twice. Primary role is finding land drops. That's just what it's always been run for in decks. And in this case, it succeeds, finding Drew a Clifftop Retreat. He's got white mana, but how much good can it do him? Is it a turn too late? Maybe Daniel just has a counterspell for Renounce the Guilds now. Maybe Drew's just going to fall over to this Geist of St. Traft because he drew it 1 turn too late. You never know.
Yeah, I guess not getting a great look at Drew's hand.
I believe it's got Syncopate, obviously, another Think Twice, and a Azorius Charm, and I think a Snapcaster Mage. I don't think he has a Renounce the Guilds yet, but that's the kind of card he needs.
So it looks like a War Leader's Helix to the face from Dan Riebling, and Drew's going to go ahead and take the opportunity to cast that Syncopate, which Dan was aware of.
Yeah, Dan knew that was there, which means he's probably got something real spicy in store for Drew.
And Geist of St. Traft and Angel Token swinging in yet again, and Augur blocks. And Drew's going to take 4.
Pass his turn. It's very strange.
And a Think Twice from Drew. So he's got 2 Think Twices in the graveyard now available to flashback. Draws another Sulphur Falls. I think, is that all 4 Sulphur Falls?
It looks like 3 Falls and a Steam Vents.
Oh, I mean, there's the 4th, I think, in his hand. I think
the 4th in his hand?
4th Sulphur Falls in his hand, possibly.
Can't quite tell.
No.
Dan, considering jamming a Restoration Angel, it looks like, during the end step. If he was going to play this, he probably should have just played it on his turn when Drew was basically tapped out, or during Dan's end step when Drew actually was tapped out.
So here comes Geist and Angel yet again for Dan, and I imagine we're going to see the same old song and dance. Augur jumps in front of the Geist of St. Traft. They're going to do that dance all the time, and Azorius Charm will save 4 damage for Drew. Deals with that Angel.
Drew's just trying to buy some time. Think Twices, draw a card.
As the flashback Think Twice finds a Glacial Fortress, and there we say, while you're tapped out, I'm going to Restoration Angel my Geist. Go ahead. Okay.
This is the play Dan probably should have made last turn. It's a lot riskier now as Drew has seen many more cards and could actually have found a Supreme Verdict,
like
which
he
would
has
punish
found,
Daniel.
He has found to Renounce the Guilds.
Yep.
So
he'll certainly be playing that one and the threat of Geist of St. Traft. He's probably debating whether he should play it now or wait until Daniel's turn. If he waits till Daniel's turn, he risks some bad things happening to him.
Yeah, counter spells Namely, as you mentioned, Dispel is one of the cards that Daniel likely brought in. So we're going to see Drew cast that, renounce the guilds now. And
Success. No force of wills here.
Nope. Not yet, anyway. M14 though, just around the corner.
Yeah, Drew might have stabilized here. He's got an Azorius Charm to send that Angel packing for a turn, and then he'll have another Think Twice in the yard, try and draw some cards. He's going to go for Snapcaster Mage Azorius Charm, try and get a little further ahead that way. This play also allows him the possibility to Azorius Charm from the hand, should Daniel counter the Snapcaster Mage.
So, there you see the Azorius Charm deals with the Restoration Angel.
And now Drew's the one with the clock in play, and Daniel is the one slowed down. We already know he's missing land drop, so Drew doesn't have to worry about that Slayer Stronghold coming online with the Restoration Angel sitting on top of Daniel's deck. It's mostly just a blank land for the time being. Daniel passes after considering a play. That's got to trouble Drew slightly. He's probably curious what that is.
Yeah, so we see, I know there's that Sulphur Falls, and Azorius Charm, Sphinx's Revelation, and is it Snapcaster? No, it's Augur.
Drew passes turn. That seems ill-advised. I imagine he was a little scared of a Restoration Angel, but he can actually just Azorius Charm a Restoration Angel back to the top of the deck if he swings, and just leave Daniel with 2 threats stacked up there doing nothing. Looks like he's planning to just cast Sphinx's Revelation, so perhaps he just didn't want to put himself in the position where he has to defend his creatures that way.
And it looks like a Boros Charm with Extort on the stack. Drew is going to respond to it with that Sphinx's Revelation for 4.
Yeah, that's a pretty healthy play, and it's likely going to wind up rewarding Drew with the win. He gains 4, effectively countering the Boros Charm.
Yeah.
And peels 4 cards. Not bad for 7 mana.
One of which was a Thundermaw Hellkite. He also drew an Azorius Charm, I think a couple of lands. And there's a Thundermaw Hellkite from Dan Riebling.
Oof.
So we know Drew's enter the battlefield tapped. Dan's do not.
Perhaps this was the card Daniel was hoping to set up with that War Leader's Helix. He was maybe hoping to draw a 5th land on that turn and resolve a Thundermaw Hellkite after baiting out the Syncopate, but because he didn't draw the 5th land, it just wound up looking weird. And Drew, no doubt, was a little confused. Or perhaps he even made the read. You know, it's not that unreasonable a read to figure out.
So Snapcaster and Augur Bolus going to tag team in there and knock Daniel down to 16.
Yeah, Drew needs to hang on to that Azorius Charm at a minimum. So he's probably just going to cast Thundermaw Hellkite tapped and hold open Azorius Charm. That's my guess. And yep, that's what he does.
Go. It's a scary place to be, though. All your creatures are tapped. You've got 2 mana up for an Azorius Charm, so 1 counter spell from Dan
could kill him.
Could kill him, yeah. But it does resolve there. Azorius Charm puts the Thundermaw on top, and Dan's going to go ahead and...
Yeah, I was about to say, he must have the kill here if he's not Restoration Angeling that Thundermaw Hellkite, because that was like, no-brainer play pretty much.
Yeah, so he burns Drew out alongside a Steering Spear.
Yep, turn burn for 2 damage, Searing Spear for 3 with an Extort trigger to finish the job. That leaves this match 1-1 going to Game 3. And, you know, we saw the pressure created by Geist of St. Traft in that game. Drew didn't answer it fast enough, and it ate up a lot of his life total. And, you know, at that late game point, Drew was mostly in control. He had the more dominant position, he had more mana, he had more spells, but Daniel just needed to get in the last few points, and that's how his deck should have been shifted. So I imagine his sideboarding worked out.
Yeah, the more I think about it, or at least the more I see it, actually, that Blind Obedience is doing some work, because not only is it keeping the Thundermauls from being as effective, but a lot of times with this deck, you know, you're playing Snapcaster Mage to block, or Restoration Angel as a surprise blocker, and none of that works here. The fact that they have Flash is almost, well, I mean, you still get the I'm going to play it at the end of your turn kind of thing, if it's the best spell, you know, that's available during your turn. You still leave Counter Magic up and Sphinx's Revelation up, so you still get that aspect of it, but the whole Flash blocking thing is out of the picture when the Blind Obedience is in play, and on top of that, you've seen Daniel take advantage of the Extort.
Yeah. It's really an awkward card because it forces Drew into a more aggressive position than he'd like to take. His creatures are built to block primarily. That's what they're best at. So he doesn't really want to be forced into that position where he's attacking with them because the Blind Obedience is keeping him from flashing in blockers. But by the same token, the Extort from Daniel means that Daniel has a slightly higher life total. His spells do slightly more damage, so he's the better aggressor. So, he's really just forcing Drew into the wrong role. And that means that Drew either has to, get a slightly above average draw in order to adopt fully to the control role, or he has to enter into an aggressive race in which he's just flat out not favored. Those are his options.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder, we haven't seen a lot of Blind Obedience, but I almost wonder if this is the exact kind of deck that wants them. This very aggressive sort of deck that is able to kind of capitalize on the Extort because it casts a lot of spells, and it's also got, very difficult to deal with creatures like Geist of St. Traft.
The issue I have with Blind Obedience in Standard right now is it's only a difference maker in a few matchups. Mostly matchups that feature Thundermaw Hellkite or Hellrider. That's really only like 3 or 4 decks at most.
So Drew's going to be on the play here. He leads with a Hallowed Fountain. Daniel has a Sacred Foundry, and a Sulphur falls from Drew on turn 2 here, and he's considering something here. Looks like probably an Augur. Yes, Augur of Bolas. Comes into play untapped because there is no Blind Obedience. He finds an Azorius Charm. You thought he whiffed, didn't you?
I thought he whiffed. I thought it was a land for a
I
second.
saw land, and then that Azorius Charm peeking out from the middle there.
Drew's opener, very resistant to Geist of St. Traft. He has access to a Renounce the Guilds and a Supreme Verdict. So I imagine he probably feels pretty safe here.
So a Blind Obedience on turn 2 for the 3rd consecutive game from Dan Riebling. Keep in mind, he only plays 2 of those. So he is real good at drawing that Blind Obedience in his opener, or by turn 2 anyway.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be that strong in this game. Drew's on the play, so some of the tempo gains of the Blind Obedience are negated, and Daniel misses his turn 3 Geist, his most powerful play. That just leaves Drew in the driver's seat. He's going to start getting in those points of damage, drawing cards, doing the things his deck is better at than Daniel's. Keep in mind, the one thing that Daniel's deck is better at is, dealing damage. That's all he's really got going for him.
So a Boros Charm will deal 4 to Drew. In the meantime, Augur of Bolas coming over at that Trident and poking Dan's life total down to 16. Yeah, actually, I believe it was down to 18, and there's a shock land involved.
That's an odd play from Dan to just fire off the Boros Charm there. He'd already played a card, so he didn't have to worry about going to his cleanup step on the next turn. I would assume it means he has like a pretty stern curve of 4-mana spell into like probably multiple Hellkites or something. That's what I would think if my opponent just burned me for 4, because they don't want to risk a situation where they're tapping out for Hellkite and putting me to 4, because that's the nightmare situation if you have a Boros Charm still in your hand. He could also just have Snapcaster Mage. Yeah, I think I see a Snapcaster Mage right there. So in fact,
Snapcaster Extort.
Hoping perhaps to draw a 4th land, be able to Snapcaster Mage the Boros Charm as a turn 4 play. But instead, he just decides to commit a 2-1 beater to the board. And I actually like this play from Daniel because he does need to be aggressive. He needs to attack Drew, get in every point he can. He's mana screwed. His spells deal more damage. This is the only way he's going to win the game.
Yeah, in the meantime, since that Boros Charm is resolved, Drew added a Restoration Angel to the board and swung in with both of his guys. Snapcaster came down for Dan, as we mentioned, but he was not getting much value out of it other than as an Ambush Viper. So an Azorius Charm on the Snapcaster, the attacking Snapcaster Mage, Daniel is going to dispel the Azorius Charm and extort it, and Snapcaster is going to get in for 2.
Yep, Drew goes to 12. Cycles to think twice, and Drew's going to be more careful from here. He knows Daniel can kill him. It's totally realistic. That Blind Obedience will eat him away. He knows Dan has access to things like Thundermaw Hellkite and Warleader's Helix, so he'll move back to the control role now that there's a 2-1 on the field. He doesn't need to attack with things like Augur of Bolas. He can just rely on his deck to outdraw his opponent. He'll send the Restoration Angel, and probably just pass turn.
Yeah, that looks like the play. So Daniel untaps his 3 lands, actually finds a 4th, I believe. It looks like a Sacred Foundry. Comes into play untapped, so he's going to take 2. He has got something he wants to use to make use of that mana. We know he has Restoration Angel. That is looking like it's the play, but I can't quite see his hand. He goes with Geist of St. Traft, and
no Extort?
No Extort, despite shocking himself. So, I mean, Must be holding
that has to trip out Drew.
Yeah, Swords to Plowshares. Or...
Purify the Grave is the only card that like really makes sense, I think, that we've seen from this list.
Yeah, look at Drew's face.
Yeah, Drew's
written on his face.
What
like,
could this be?
So I'm gonna renounce the guilds. Does that work?
Beckon
Okay.
Apparition would be a sweet one if he had it right there. Right?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that's
be...
a gold spirit token.
I think you're right. I'm almost positive you're right. So renounce the guilds resolves deals with the Geist of St. Traft, and I think that was a flashed back. Think twice.
Daniel appears to be...
He says, okay. Looks like he was going to respond to it.
Yeah, I think he must have that Purify the Grave and was perhaps thinking about, cacking the other Think Twice while it's in the graveyard. But
yeah.
I don't think that that's necessarily a great line here. You'll get a lot more value catching a Snapcaster Mage unawares. That said, with his Mana Strap and his Geist dead, he might just be in too much trouble at this point.
So Restoration Angel gets in yet again for Drew. Drew's going to cast a second copy of Augur of Bolas. Comes into play tapped, of course, due to that Blind Obedience. And he finds an Azorius Charm off of that one as well. His hand looks like it's Azorius Charm, Restoration Angel, some lands. I think he's got a Supreme Verdict as well, but I couldn't swear to it. I'm having trouble seeing. He's got a...
Yeah, he sells the Verdict from his opener.
Okay. So, looks like Restoration Angel, number 2 from Drew at end of turn here.
This should come pretty close to locking things up. Drew's really far ahead. Daniel can only extort so many things. A War Leader's Helix, not the card Daniel wants Drew to find there.
Yeah, the Angel resets the Augur of Bolas, and Augur finds War Leader's Helix. Drew in real good shape to win this particular game and match. Draws a Snapcaster Mage. Everybody in.
Yep.
Gonna make Daniel have some answers here. We know he has Restoration Angel.
Problem is Restoration Angel, he knows he can play it, and Drew can just burn it right out of the way, and lethal will come across the table.
Yeah.
So that option's straight out. Has to try and devise something a little trickier. But that's all he's got.
That's what he's gonna do. Go ahead. I'm gonna flash blink my Snapcaster Mage. War Leader's Helix your Angel, and yeah, that'll do it. Drew Levin takes the game and match 2-1 with his variant on Blue-White-Red Flash over Dan Riebling's Blue-White-Red Blind Obedience Geist version. But that is an interesting deck. I'm really glad we got to see that. And the Blind Obedience,